Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to today's TEL Talk webinar. My name is Nikki Lepowski. If you have the option to see your webcam, both myself and our guest speaker, Cami, are on via webcam. We have everybody muted just for the purpose of getting through content and limiting background noise. But certainly if there's anything that comes up, we're happy to take you off of mute, or you can answer any questions in the question or dialogue box. Once again, thanks so much, you guys, for joining today. We're going to go through a little bit of information and then get to the content of, what you're really here for, which is Cami's info. So we'll go ahead and just go through some information here that is probably beneficial for you as it relates to TEL Talks. So again, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. Today's TEL Talk is actually going to be supporting children in the era of racism and police brutality. And the founder and lead consultant of We're Divine, Intercultural Community and Leadership Consulting is our guest speaker. That's Cami Howard. We're super excited for her to be here today. I just wanted to let you guys know that these TEL Topics or TEL Talk webinars are held monthly. They are here really to engage with you as a program leader and to facilitate a solutions-based discussion about our field, particularly in Minnesota, but as you can tell, many times these topics go throughout the country and the world. So for TEL Talk webinars, a couple of things we just want to point out are that these 1-hour webinars do not meet the standards for professional development events, and so you will not receive a certificate of completion. However, this information is really important, to bring us together as a community. We just want to be clear that it will not translate to your learning record at this time. And then again, the designation of these webinars was really intended to be a community building event. My name is Nikki Lepowski, and I am one of the team, part of the team for the TEL Talks webinars. And Christy Berg is also here in presence. She's not here in reality. She's taking a few well-deserved days off, but she is really the mastermind behind coordinating all of these events and webinars for you. We also have an offline team as part of our coordinating office. That's Corey Woosley and Katie Hoffman. And some of the topics that we've discussed in the past in relation to TEL Talk are on the screen right there. Something exciting to note is that you can now watch these recorded webinars on our Childcare Aware of Minnesota's webpage. It's actually under the Career Advancement page. If you need help locating that, please let me know. That's where any of the previous topics will be located, and then also this one will be too within about a week. Again, today's topic is listed there on the screen for you. And in the next coming month, we'll kind of delve into a little bit of support as early childhood field educators can help with families experiencing homelessness. And our guest speaker there is Janelle Lepa, who is the Family and Youth Director at Simpson Housing Services. Many of you are probably familiar with what Childcare Aware of Minnesota is, but just to recap quickly, you can see on your screen a visual of where Childcare Aware is located throughout the state. And our goal is to help families find a quality childcare program that best meets their needs, and in addition, providing support through the professionals and the educators within the system. And we do that in a multitude of different ways through professional development, Eager to Learn, grants, our QRAS, Parent Aware, and of course, teach and retain scholarships and support to trainers and RBPD specialists. The goal again is to keep the community informed also on the importance of early childhood care and education in our state. The next two screens are just some information for you about some programs within Childcare Aware of Minnesota and how they could support you as a program leader. So CCIS is the Child Care Information Services Department, and you can see there exactly how they help to influence program support and to also leverage information with program leaders. They can be reached at the email address that's on the screen, and if you have any more questions from them, go ahead and just email Jen. The Center for Inclusive Childcare, CICC, so similar acronym but a little different, provides a different set of support to you as a program leader. They provide actually a few different types of coaching, and of course virtually right now, but individual and small group. And they have a really great team across the state that can support you in any of the changing needs that you might come into contact with. CICC has their contact information as well. It's the info@inclusivechildcare.org. And you can read on the screen right there some ways that they can help support your program. And lastly, before we turn it over to Cami, just want to thank and also highlight the TelTalk partners. Of course, Child Care Aware of Minnesota is the organization that I support and work through, but there are many other partners that help to offer coordinated resources around early care and education, and specifically ones that we consult for these TelTalk webinars. So we're going to welcome Cami Howard to speak on the topic of supporting children in the era of racism and police brutality. We're really glad you can be with us today. So let me go ahead and turn that over to you, Cami.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited, might be the wrong word, to be able to be in this era that we even have to talk about this, but it's an important, very, very important subject, and it's near and dear to my heart. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota, born and raised, and in particularly, I'm from the South Minneapolis area where George Floyd was murdered, and I wanted a way to be able to give back, to contribute to the children and families. I wanted to be able to educate others about the experience, the lived experience of being a brown body individual, the lived experience about working with children and families, BIPOC children and families that experience marginalization every day. So I'm glad that you guys are on board. I did this session about 2 weeks ago at the Research Specialist Conference. If you have attended it 2 weeks ago, I did change it up a little bit, so you will get some new content. But it is important that this is not a one and done, that you continue to educate yourselves and familiarize yourselves with diversity practices, with unpacking the impact of racism and racialized trauma. And so I hope that this is just the beginning and it's not a one and done for you, because your role is so important in shaping the experiences for children and families that you serve. So I wanted to start off by this first screen. And on this first screen, you actually see a picture of my cousin in the corner, and he is holding his baby. His baby is about 3 months old in this picture, and it was really, really important for him to bring his child to the site where George Floyd was murdered, because he knows he has to prepare his child for the biases and what he's going to inherit as a brown body child, a brown body young Black man. And so even as early as infancy, brown and Black and marginalized parents have to think about, how do I keep them safe? How do I prepare them from the negative experiences, especially the racial experiences in the world? And how do I build cultural identity, strong sense of self, and protect them in their home? Because once they leave their home, I cannot guarantee their safety. That's something that is really, really important. So as we go through this hour session, I want you to think about, well, what is your role and what is your responsibility in unpacking the impact of racism, racialized trauma, fear, which is real, that a lot of the kids may have with police or just the uniform in general. Children are being exposed to things more because they're online and their technology skills are a lot better than mine. And so we want to prepare ourselves a lot more so that we can support children and families. Also, I don't want this to be a lecture, so if you guys have any questions, conversations, put it in chat, and I'll read it out to everybody. So on your right-hand side or wherever your box is, you should be able to type any questions or comments. Before we even start to talk to kids and parents about unpacking the impact of racism, police brutality, I want you to think about, what do you need yourself? How comfortable are you with even having conversations about race, about microaggressions, about racialized trauma? What education do you need yourself outside of this one session? What more can you do? Books is a great resource for you just to understand the experience of marginalized kids. I have a few books that I ordered specifically for the racial unrest times. One is called Mama, Did You Hear the News? And it is written by Sonia Gray. So Mama, Did You Hear the News? This in particular shows the impact of protest, racial violence from a kid's perspective. And I love using books because now you have a visual support to help children process. And our kids can understand as early as preschool the differences, the impact of racism, that brown and black individuals are being treated differently. So again, as educators, as providers, as caregivers, we have to prepare ourselves. So Mama, Did You Hear the News is one book that I recommend. The second book, I love books. The second book I recommend is called The Talk. And it says a Black family's conversation about racism and police brutality. What I loved about this book is this individual did a very good job of being able to depict the impact of watching George Floyd, that's in the book, being murdered on the news. And the kids are witnessing that. They talked about police safety and how to keep yourself safe. But what they also added was a section of cultural pride. Our children need to believe in themselves. They need to love themselves. They need to build their self-identity, self-worth. They need to know that their brown and blackness is beautiful, even more than any other child, because the world and our history in America has told them something differently. So these are two books that I recommend just to prepare yourself to be able to talk to kids about these difficult conversations. I want to educate you guys in some terms that's going to help you, and then we're going to watch a few videos that talks about the impact of these terms. So on your screen, I have three terms: microaggressions, micro-invalidations, and micro-insults. And there's nothing micro about these terms if you're the person that's targeted. It's a macro. It feels macro to you. But the definition of microaggressions is these everyday nonverbal environmental insults, derogatory statements, negative messages, and it might not be intentional, but for the person that's targeted, it impacts your mental, your physical, your self-worth, how you view the world, how you feel about yourself. Invalidations are communications that exclude, negate, or nullify thoughts, feelings, and experience of reality of marginalized individuals. And then insults are verbal and nonverbal communications that convey rudeness and insensitivity. These things are happening on a daily basis. It's happened to me as a professional and working with young children in the workplace environment. I've been targeted by microaggressions, invalidations, and insults. Children have been targeted by microaggressions, microinvalidations, and insults. And it may not be intentionally, but it impacts the child's self-esteem, self-worth, their development, and their being. Examples of what I've seen in the classroom is calling brown and black children out when they're not the one necessarily talking, or they're not the one necessarily disrupting classrooms. Having brown and brown body and black body children speak on behalf of their cultural group, right? Treating them differently or assuming that they have negative behaviors just because of who they are. These things are happening on a daily basis. And our role is not only to disrupt these cycles from happening, but to protect our children. Our children are deserving of protection. So I want to pause right there for a minute because I'm going to show you a video of children talking about their experience of microaggression. And what I love about this video is the coherentness and the ability for these kids to describe the experience, what they have to hold, the responsibility they hold for adults. And these adults are supposed to keep them safe and not contribute to negative experiences. So I'm going to switch screens for a moment. But if you have any questions about microaggressions, invalidations, or insults, please put it in the chat while I switch screens for right now. And we worked on being able to show these videos and hear it. So I hope everybody can hear it. If you can't hear it, please let me know in your chat because it'll be hard for me to tell.
Thanks, Cami. Just wanted to chime in. We don't have any questions or anything in the chat at this point, so I will keep you informed if I see anything that comes through.
Perfect. Thank you. They're so quiet. Hopefully you can see this new screen and that you can hear.
So pretty for a black girl. Oh, she has a June nose. Oh, your hair would look so good if it was straight. Shoes are so cheap. Why are you so cheap? Do you speak good English? How are you in Iraqi, June? I think the person saying microaggression kind of never like think about it. This person was saying it was my son. Like I was just honest, they would like say something like that. You don't want to make a big deal about it. And it's also like you said something that offended me, so I feel like I should speak up because they're micro, because they're subtle and they're small. You feel like you don't have a reason to be upset. You're overreacting, and people even can make you feel that way when you bring it up. They're like, oh, you texted your job, you're making too big of a deal for this. Why are you overreacting? And I think you feel seriously, it was just a joke. Chill out. So, oh no, I actually love black people. A lot of people call it like they try to just minimize the situation. If someone feels hurt by microaggression, it should just be pushed aside. It definitely has negative impact to people, just like they actually are. Those kinds of subtle offensive comments can build up over time and they can have like a deep psychological effect. Yeah, making make you feel bad and that's we try to but awkward like being personal but it's important because you guys be aware of what you're saying, like who you're speaking to, what you're saying, and how it affects.
That was very short, but to the point. But I am going to ask the audience, what are your responses? What did you hear from the children? They, even though they're a lot older, they were still children that deserve protection and deserve not to have to deal with such things as microaggressions. What stood out for me is their ability to internalize it as deep psychological impact and negative effects impact their self-esteem. They talked about adults telling them not to take it so seriously. They're being sensitive. It was just a joke. So these are kids, and their ability to have to even navigate these kind of negative racial occurrences when, as caregivers, as adults, we're supposed to protect them, right? So even if a few audience members can just put in the chat member maybe some reflections, some thoughts. What did you hear? What did you notice? How were you impacted from hearing from the children being impacted by microaggressions? Is there a few people willing to share out?
Hey, Cami, I'm not sure if you can see in the questions box, but there were a couple pieces of feedback. I'm hearing, oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. So can you read it to me? Do you mind just reading me a couple?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Stephanie says, they hear and understand everything adults and peers say to them. Kelly's asking who is the author of the book, The Talk. And Jessica saying she recognized how commonplace it is in their lives. And Christine mentions critical awareness that needs to be taught.
Yeah, absolutely. So the author of the book, I don't want to chop up the name, so I'm going to spell it. It's Ama, A-M-A, and then the last name is, I believe, Yawson, Y-A-W-S-O-N, Ama Yawson, Ama Yawson. And I agree to all of those comments. It's our responsibility. We need to have this daily conversations and really think about the experience of the child that's being targeted and not minimizing the impact. It's our job to validate that. And because these things, we all have biases, we all have cultural blind spots, we might say something that harms the child. But it's our job to sit in that impact and then to be able to repair that, to apologize, to understand the impact of that, to understand how it impacts the child and their experiences, right? And to acknowledge the harm that was done. I think that's very important, that we don't acknowledge the harm that was done to children inadvertently.
Cami, there's another comment on here that I just want to mention that's really relevant. And Kelly mentions that her daughter is brown and she's white. And so her daughter hears, quote unquote, "You sound white."
Yeah, those are definitely microaggressions, and I hear it a lot in especially brown and black communities, as if talking with articulation or pronouncing your words. Me growing up in Minnesota, I've been told that you sound white, you're not black enough. And what's important for your child to know, especially since they're a multi-ethnic child, is loving them for who they are. And you have to protect them at home. Because not only they're going to experience microaggressions from as a brown body child, as a multi-ethnic child, from people of privilege, power, and status, it may happen within their own cultural group. So building that cultural pride at home and having children loving the skin that they're in every day, building a positive sense of self, encouraging the children, you articulate yourself. And that is a positive sense of who you are. There is no connection of because you sound this way, you're white, or because you sound this way, you're black. You have to start these kind of conversations at home. When you're working with younger children, I like using books like Skin Like Me. It talks about just understanding the positive aspects of being brown, being able to have some self-identity. I think it's important. I remember watching a Facebook video, and the preschool teacher, the first week, she took paint. And she matched the paint colors with every kid in the classroom. And it's really also important for white kids to be able to identify themselves, because white is not a culture. I mean, white isn't a race, but it's not a culture. So we have to have kids be able to own their own specific identity. And what I loved about that is she matched every kid with a different color of paint or crayons some people use in the classroom, and that gave them a sense of ownership of who they were. So you weren't brown or black or white, you were butter pecan, you were mocha, you were peach, and they just increased their confidence because they felt like they were unique, right? They believed in who they were, and I think those are important things that we forget to talk about. This is Skin by Me is by Latasha Perry, another very good book. There's also a lot of videos out. I think with kids that are multi-ethnic, it's even more complex because they're brown on the outside, but they have multiple dimensions of their identity and who they are. And so making sure that you find positive aspects of their identity in all walks of life. One more book I love, and this is local, it's by Maya Marshall. Maya, M-A-Y-A, Marshall, M-A-R-C-H-E-L-L-E. And she wrote this book, Your Hue Looks Good on You. She's from Minnesota, but it talks about the self-identity and the connection to African-American hair. And for children with African-American hair, we have more ethnic hair, and it's tied to our identity. And I remember being as a kid being teased by sometimes that my coils are too curly, negative comments because it looked more dry. And so we have to remember to put seeds of goodness and positivity in children because we want them to love themselves inside and out. Okay. I want to give you the term racialized trauma, which is pretty new, even in the mental health field. So I'm a licensed mental health practitioner, and I cannot diagnose anybody with racialized trauma because it does not exist in my diagnostic manual. But yet we know that people are experiencing trauma, even it mimics PTSD symptoms because of who they are, because of their marginalized experiences, because of discrimination, because of the microaggressions, because of the comments, you don't sound black enough or you sound white. And all of these things contribute to how they feel about themselves. But until a couple of years ago, we didn't have a word for it. And it even made me as an adult second guess myself. When I walked into different jobs and then positions I was having, I felt different. I was treated different. I felt isolated. And I would second guess, like, is it me? Am I not being a team player? Am I hard to get along with? Am I too emotionally expressive? And I started to shift and adapt myself to fit in with the majority when the majority should have been welcoming of my differences. But now that I have a word for it, I experienced racialized trauma. I experienced anxiety and depression and low self-esteem and shame just for living in the skin that I am in. And so our children too can experience that when there's negative experiences around them, especially as they go into the world. They are on social media, they're hearing negative aspects. The media has a huge presence, and I feel like our self-esteem. We oftentimes, if you don't have a connection with diverse groups, your first impression might be what you see in the media. And those are negative depictions of our community. And so what we have to do is, again, destructing those cycles. So I'm gonna pause one more time, and I'm gonna show you a short video. It comes from one of my favorite shows called New Amsterdam. And in this video, there was a young child that was hospitalized, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. So there was like no medical reason why he was hospitalized. So they brought in the psychiatrist. And what the psychiatrist did is gave him a racial microaggression assessment. And he started to talk about his experience in school. And what he learned is that that child was being harassed and experienced racial microaggressions by his teachers on a daily basis. And it led to him being checked in the hospital, physically sick, physically sick. So we're gonna take a few minutes to watch this video. And again, keep your questions coming. Nikki, interrupt me at any time. We'll come back together.
I have one question that was not on my list from earlier. You feel up to answering it? Why wouldn't the librarian let you take out those books? I don't know. I think you do know. I think you know it so well that it's eating you up inside and just causing you to be sick. Why wouldn't the librarian let you take out those books? Because of the color of my skin. But she's not racist. I don't doubt that for a second, but racism's so deeply ingrained in our society that people, myself included, we often don't realize that we're perpetuating it. So when people give me nicknames I don't want because my name is different, yes, it's a microaggression because of the color of your skin. What about when adults tell me I speak really good English because of the color of your skin? Or when people assume I only got into my school because I'm diverse? Yes. The teacher tells me to lower my voice even though I'm not the only one talking? Or she makes me answer all the Latino questions because I'm the only one in the room? Yes. I just thought I didn't deserve to be there. I wasn't good enough. I was a mistake. No, see this. Listen to me. All of this, everything you're talking about, has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the world around you. You walking around with all of this shame and confusion and stress inside your body. I can see that you don't want to feel this right now. But I'm telling you, your body is definitely feeling it. And that is what is making you sick. So, how are you going to fix the world? I'm not. I can't. But I can help you process. Because if we can name it,
Again, I want to come back together, and I would love some feedback on just what did you see, what did you notice, and in particular, what did the psychiatrist do or give that child? What did the psychiatrist do or give that child? We can have some audience feedback about that. What did you hear? What did you notice? What was the experience? What was it like being the child in the hospital? And what did that psychiatrist do or give that child?
Cami, that's a great question, and I just want to put it out there again to everyone that's participating. If you would rather speak up, please go ahead and raise your hand, and I will unmute your line. Otherwise, continue to just put your feedback and answers to Cami's questions in the questions box, and I'll make sure to read those out. So far, we have Kateri says he affirmed his experiences, and Astra says validation.
Yep. Validation, and that's just the start. And once it's validated, you can start to unpack the experiences. But if you notice that he named it, and I think oftentimes as caregivers, we're afraid to say racism. We're afraid to talk about race. But individuals need to be able to name it, just like the doctor said, so we can tame it, right? If I have a name for my experiences, it at least gives me a validation of what I'm experiencing is real. There's something that's not necessarily wrong with me, but it's happening on the outside and it's impacting me. And it made this child physically sick. So this child's cortisol levels, the stress levels were high, and it caused physical symptoms so much that they had to be hospitalized. So there's a book I love to read called The Body Keeps the Score. I'm sure many people have heard of that book. But what I love about that book is that it talks about how stressors and anxiety and adversity impacts your physical health. It's the same thing when we learned about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. We know that it impacts your physical health. It impacts your ability to concentrate. It impacts your ability, to be present. I used to work at the crisis nursery, and we would have so many children come in with upper respiratory illnesses. And we know in early childhood that we can't diagnose asthma until about preschool. But there were toddlers about 4 or 5 years old that were continuing to come with upper respiratory illnesses. We associated that with adversity, adverse childhood experiences, some of the negative experiences that they were exposed to in their environment, either at home or racial trauma. And it started to take a toll on them so much that it impacted their ability to breathe. Yeah, asthma is connected to adversity. So everything that we do impacts the child. Every moment is so important. I used to tell the teachers when I was a director, we can't have a bad day, because that bad day for that moment can impact the child so much, not only their mental, their physical, their emotional, their developmental well-being. So we have to show up in a positive manner every day for the child. Any other questions do we have, Nikki, or comments before I move to the next slide?
Yeah, there's a couple other comments, again, just mentioning validation and affirmation. Lisa says that he acknowledged the child's experience. He offered not to solve the problem, but for him to help him process.
Yes. And I love that you brought that up, because we have to be realistic. We can't control what happens outside the world. And it would set that child up for failure to say that he can solve racism. But what you can do is create a sense of safety in your environment and in your sphere of influence. Again, when I worked at the nursery, we didn't guarantee safety outside of those walls, but while you're here, you are safe. While you're here, this is somebody you can talk to. While you're here inside our space, you can expect help. You have to remember, once they leave your care, we don't know what their experiences are, and so we don't want to set them up for false expectations that racism is going to go away, or they're not going to experience that. So you have to maintain what you can influence and be consistent about that. I'm a safe person. I'm somebody that you can talk to. I can help you work through this experience. What also was profound to me is, if you guys noticed, the first thing that child did was protect his teacher. When the doctor started to ask about his experience, he jumped and said, well, she's not racist. And I'm like, wow, even the kids, innate ability to protect somebody that's supposed to be protecting them. So just food for thought. This screen is about racism and mental health. And again, tying it to racialized trauma, now that we have a word for it. And racialized trauma is just like post-traumatic stress. It's just like any other adversity or trauma, except it is tied to the race, the experience of being a brown, black, or marginalized individual and just operating as yourself, what you inherit. It's not fair. You shouldn't have to go through it, but it's real. And the impact that it has on mental health is real in our children. And as we noticed, it started to affect his mental health, and then his mental health affected his sense of self. It also affected his emotional health and his physical health. So I think oftentimes we don't connect it enough to mental health, where kids are experiencing more anxiety, more worry, more panic, decrease sense of self, feeling lonely, feeling isolated. These are all signs and symptoms of the stress that we should be aware of when we're working with brown and Black children in the community. Okay. Again, Nikki, just interrupt me if there's any questions. So what do we need to do? First thing, we need to normalize these conversations about race and differences. As a brown and Black body child, adult now, I knew I was Black from the beginning. And so I think it's hard for some people that represent male privilege or power or white individuals to talk about race, because it feels like, oh, we shouldn't talk about race. I don't see color, or, we live in a colorblind society. Everybody's the same. And that's actually a microaggression, because I need you to see, and children need you to see their brownness and their Blackness, because that's an important part of their identity. So with good intent, you want to say, oh, don't notice those differences. Don't say they're Black. Don't say they're brown. But kids notice those differences. So start to normalize conversations about race. That's why I love the teacher that did the paint colors, because it gives kids a specific identity to race, and then we can start to tie it to culture. It's never too early to start these discussions. Kids can differentiate differences, and so let's start to talk about this in our regular program. We want to create a safe space, though, for this conversation, and making sure that it's developmentally appropriate. So I say about preschools, when kids start to identify and notice these differences, so start to talk about the differences. Stacy has red hair, and Stacy's family might be from this part of the country, and Jacob has brown hair, and Jacob's family is this race and this culture. Making this a normal part of our daily conversation is where we need to start. Racism, I even use those words even with preschool children. And how I use it is I need to prepare children to expect the biases that they're going to inherit in the world. So my nieces and nephews, the kids that are in my family, the kids that I work with, I have to protect them as early as preschool to navigate their body and their experiences, because the world does not look at them the same way that I do, not with the same love. And so when caregivers are not having these difficult conversations about race and racism, you're not doing them any justice, because they're going to inherit the biases, they're going to inherit discrimination, so we need to prepare them for that. We also need to help parents start to talk about these conversations. And so a lot of times parents may not have the words. And so we have to help them process their emotions. I use terms like racism, and how I connect it is I use it kid-friendly terms. I talk about, because of your skin, there are some people that are going to treat you differently. And that's not fair. And that doesn't feel good. But I need you to know that here in this Child Development Center, you are loved, you are beautiful, so that you are balancing the biases that they're going to inherit, preparing them for the biases that they will experience in the world. It's ignorance not to think that a brown or Black child is not going to experience it. They are, and they experience it pretty early. And then balance that out with cultural pride, feeding them with their identity, building positive aspects of being a brown or Black child, talking about the positive role models as an Indigenous or a Native child, talking about how beautiful some of their hair is and their coils for African American children, talking about the experience and the positive cultural identity for some of our Indigenous or Native boys that wear their long ponytails, teaching other kids in the classroom about these cultural differences. Okay, we don't want kids to worry necessarily, so I don't feed them things that they're not worried about. I start by asking them, what do they know? Kids are noticing, and they're even talking about the George Floyd murder. They talk about protesting, and so I start to ask questions. Well, who's George Floyd? And what do you know about him? I was talking to my 4-year-old niece the other day, and I said, well, she mentioned George Floyd on her own. I said, well, who is that? She said, well, he was a man that was killed by police officers. And I said, well, why do you think he was killed? And I wanted her to understand that nothing that he did deserves for him to not be living. he might have did something that was not nice or unfair, but he didn't deserve that, right? I also connected with police officers, and it's so important to understand that the brown and black children that we work with, some uniforms are triggering because police are not always positive in communities of color. I've had so many kids witness negative experiences with police officers engaging with their parents in the community. I mean, I remember even in working in the crisis center when we had to have child protection come and police officers remove kids, I made sure that they came ununiformed because just recognizing those uniforms could have been a trigger for those kids that had negative experiences. So I gotta acknowledge that there are some negative experiences that just the uniform holds. And then again, I wanna combat it with some positivity. So I cannot guarantee that all police officers are safe, because that's not real for all of our children. But I can guarantee some of the police officers that I bring into my child development center or my crisis center, you can trust them, right? So again, what is my sphere of influence? The other thing I would do is I would have police officers come on a regular basis so they can get to know them, but I would have them come without a uniform. And they would get to know that police officer for who they were. And slowly, we would kind of orientate that child to the police uniform. So they would come the first day, maybe just in regular clothes. The second day, they might have a badge. The third time they come, they might have just the top, slowly integrating them into the uniform. But every time I engaged the child with police officers, I would say, you know what, that's Mr. Steve. And remember, we know Mr. Steve. Mr. Steve is safe. And Mr. Steve is a police officer. So when Mr. Steve has his badge on, he's still safe. When Mr. Steve puts his police belt on, he's still safe. When Mr. Steve has his full uniform on, he's still safe. Introducing and orientating children to this police officer is safe. And then acknowledging that all of them are not. All of them are not. And these are the real conversations that we need to start as early as preschool. We have to be able to have these honest conversations because kids are going to come with negative experiences and triggers. I want to pause right there. Thoughts, reflections, fears, questions about even talking about racism or race or talking about negative experiences with police and acknowledging for some of our children that police are not always safe. What else do you need to prepare yourself to be able to talk and have these conversations with kids in your care?
I'm hearing a lot of agreements, or seeing a lot of agreements with the examples that you're giving, and the specificity of those examples are really helpful. So thank you for that. Again, anyone that wants to share anything else, please raise your hand or type in the questions box. Looks like we have a hand raised, Cami, so I'm going to go ahead and find that person. Karen Bradley, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and go ahead and give your feedback or your questions or comments. Oh, there you go. Now you're unmuted. Go ahead, Karen.
Go. Hi, Cami. Good to see you again. See, we in our Dakota County, we have a Facebook group that we try to share different information on, and our coach Emily had just posted a little picture of a police car and kind of introduced that topic of should we still consider police officers as community helpers, and I know several providers who have ties to the officers, and I knew one especially would just like, whew, I knew that was going to be a little hot topic. I myself also kind of explained, when I was a provider, I never thought about that. And now I've come to realize that other people have different experiences than I do. And so we're kind of bringing it up. And then the funniest thing was another provider who has not been coming to our ongoing series, Kids and Culture, when we talk about this stuff, she said, oh, I was talking about police as helpers and how they come to help people. And a new Black child in her care just looked at her and went, what are you talking about? That was not his experience. And she just kind of went, wow, I did not know how to handle that. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, first of all, come to our Kids and Culture, and there's an avenue to talk about it. But yeah, it's something you have to consider, because not everyone has everyone wave to the Eagan police officers, they're going to help someone. That's not everyone's example.
Exactly, exactly. And remembering it's a both and, because we don't want kids to walk away to say no, police officers are not safe, right? So we want to make sure that there's an understanding that, there is a good amount of police officers that want to help people, and that you can go to, but there are some that make mistakes, and there are some that are not safe. And so that's why I really try to, again, about my sphere of influence, introduce ones that are safe, that they see on a regular basis, ones that they can engage with, so they can know that there is a sense of safety, but also validating their real experience, especially in their community. And one extra thing is, I'm actually, next week, I have a training with the police department. So I'm hoping that we can start to get more police to reshape the way they interact with the community. I have officers in my family, and it feels, it hurts me to know that there are some, very few, but there are some that do damage to our community, that mean harm, and that overrides the good ones that are there. That overrides the ones that truly want to help. And so I think it's about providing the experience of both, validating the realistic, don't promise them things that you cannot control. I think that's the first thing. And then exposing them to positive police officers that they can trust. Okay, that they can trust. Good question, Karen. Any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I want to echo thank you, Karen, for raising your hand and asking that question. If anyone else has one, go ahead. It looks like we do have a question on the question box here. How do you embrace children's culture without singling an individual out based on their identity?
Well, you make it a classroom activity. And so I think it should be a shared experiences. I remember when I would do intake, I would often ask parents, what's important aspects of your culture, your experiences, your background that we can incorporate into that. I think we think of this as something additional. When I'm working with agencies, the other job that I do is DE&I consulting. And so I help agencies create an intercultural lens in everything that they do. So it should no longer be something additional or extra. Your intake should have an intercultural lens. The curriculum that you use should have an intercultural lens. How you do your parent conferences should have an intercultural lens. So just it becomes a part of your day-to-day conversations and curriculum. And talking about, when I think about culture and identity, I talk about the experiences that we bring, the practices, the belief, some of the norms that we do at home, so that it doesn't seem like, oh, we have a child that's different and they're here to teach us differences. We all have culture. And I think we often forget that, or some of us don't realize that. I even noticed when talking to some of my white peers, even adults that I work with, they minimize it and say, oh, I'm just white, I don't have a culture. Everybody has a culture. Everybody has a culture. And again, for teachers and caregivers, the more you learn about self, the more that you educate self, the more that you can identify with your background, your beliefs, your values, you bring that into the classroom, and you have all children's experience into the classroom, so that you're not just focusing on one child that looks different. Okay, that we all have culture, we all have experiences, we all have practices, and I think that should be done on a daily basis. We don't do that enough. We think about the additionals, and it's always an extra thing, but it should just be a part of the way you see the world.
Yes, and I hear that echoed by Darla on here. She said, yes, incorporating everyone's culture in the everyday experiences, not just using a tourist approach. So I think just reemphasizing some of the things you were saying earlier.
Yeah. And again, we can't say it enough, but building that healthy sense of self and culture identity. I remember in a previous, when we talked about it last week, I was talking about Brown Girl Magic, and I'm sorry, this Amazing Grace got put in the middle. And one participant said, well, what do I do with white kids? I understand the importance of talking about Brown Girl Magic, and really, it really is just allowing a child to know that their brownness is special. And the reason why we need that is because the world has rejected our brownness. And so these kids need to be having seeds of goodness on a regular basis. But that does not mean white children don't need the same thing. And so I said that then you find other special things about them. It is the Jacob magic or the Stacy magic. right? And so that each kid gets to feel special about who they are. I also think about, we have to understand and overcome some of these false and negative belief systems. And so teaching kids about positive role models in their culture, that book, The Talk, has a lot of great positive role models day to day. Teaching them about inventions that they use every day. Did you know that so-and-so made peanut butter and he was a brown man? Did you know so-and-so made the stoplight and that was a brown man? So they can see that there are people that look like me that are doing positive big things. It took me, even as an adult, and I go back and forth from Houston, Texas to Minnesota to see people that look like me in positive aspects. I didn't get that in Minnesota. I didn't get that at all. In school age, there was a few of my teachers that were African American. In my high school, very little teachers that looked like me. And in college at the University of Minnesota, 0 to none until I got actually a minor in African American studies. So you have to think about our kids' experiences. If your center is not diverse and don't mimic the kids, then you have to be able to provide them with positive aspects of people that look like me. What are positive aspects and heroes in the Native and Indigenous community? Think about some of our kids that are Hmong and Korean. We have to be able to infuse these positive aspects and these heroes. And then the other thing I love is I love social stories. And I love to create heroes that kids see in themselves. And I would often have kids create social stories about themselves and the fears that they can overcome. So I love this picture. It's a little girl in her superhero outfit, and what she sees is she sees herself as a hero. So when kids would come into my center and we would talk about some of these fears and things that we're afraid of, we would actually create a story and we would draw a picture of them. And then every day we would add something that they could overcome. And in that picture, they would add capes or things that they felt like could protect them, shields, so that they could be a hero over their fears. That they can start to navigate and control their narrative, re-switch their narrative for something that's negative to something that's positive, right? Social stories are just such a beautiful way to build self-esteem in children, but to give them something to walk away that's tangible. Remember, we talked about this. We don't have to worry because we are a hero of this. This is something that we can overcome, and you bring that book back time after time. The other thing is that establishing a sense of belonging, I think agencies don't do enough of supporting cultural pride, not just in children, but also in staff. It should be something that we make it as a part of our regular curriculum. There's a lot of agencies I've helped build affinity groups for BIPOC, and so teachers need a special space to talk about their experiences as a brown and Black and marginalized individual. So just creating these spaces for having a sense of belonging in every walk of life. The other thing, I'm gonna go back a little bit, not thank you, because I want to show you two more videos. Oftentimes we think kids are not able to handle some of the things, some of the protesting and what's happening. And words have meaning. So I'm very careful on the words that I use when I'm describing the civil unrest. I even say there's a difference between talking about a protest and a riot. Okay, protest is something that we're advocating for people that need help and support because the world has treated them differently. That's what a protest is. That's positive, right? A riot is something that is unorganized, right? It really doesn't have a purpose. So what words are you using to describe what is happening in the world? Sesame Street has a great video about Black Lives Matter and the protest and the protection of the African American community. I watch videos where parents have decided to expose kids to protest, and they talked about their emotions and how they feel. On this screen, I don't know if you guys are on social media, but this little girl at the top, I don't remember what state she was in, but she was just adamant. And she was part of a protest, and she was just, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. And for some people that don't have that experience or cultural connection, they might not understand the importance of having this child participate, right? But actually, it's a positive thing that she, in a very early age, she needs to know that she matters no matter what, and that there are other people advocating for her. And there are other people that are outside of people that look like her that care about her, right? And at the bottom, even pre-verbal, this didn't come from a protest of civil unrest. It was like it was a march for women. But this child engaged by making a sign, and she's pre-verbal, right? So kids can engage. Create a role for them. You know, making a sign to somebody, having them feel like they're a part of it. And if they're exposed to protesting, talk about their emotions, talk about their experience, acknowledge their fears. We have a few minutes. I want to just quickly, if I can go over 2 more minutes, just quickly show you this video of this mother that decided to bring her children to a protest. And I just want you to listen to their experience. While I'm switching screens, does anybody have any questions or feedback? This literally could be a 4-hour training, I'll tell you that.
Cami, we're good right now. I don't see any questions in there. Yeah, feel free to go over a few minutes. We got a little bit later start, so go ahead and take the couple minutes that you need.
Thank you. All right, we got a new screen.
Hey, yeah, so we're right on the scene of a Juneteenth right here. I want to walk you off right to the front. You can see this line of the march.
Sorry, that's the wrong one.
Right here. As you see, right front and center,
It was still playing, so.
And while Cami's pulling that up, just wanted to mention to the participants on this information, we will follow up with you and some of the resources that you guys were asked for. We talked about that before, and I know Cami's really adamant about getting you guys all the resources you need, so we'll make sure to follow up on that too.
Absolutely. I have a whole list of books, resources, links to talk with them, to help yourself to talk about racism, race, police brutality. I'll make sure I can. So I'm just letting the commercials go. You guys don't need to hit the commercials. All right, there we go. All right, new screen. Do you guys see the new screen? Nikki?
Yep, we got it looks like a video with a woman speaking. Yep, we're good.
Thank you. We rewind it a little bit from the beginning so you can hear the intro.
They saw George Floyd, and she shared their heartbreaking reaction after they went to a demonstration this week. People. Folks are killing white folks for no reason. So we're gonna do everything we can to make sure that don't happen to you, okay? Oh, the tears of a child. Jasmine Scott, the mom, is joining us now. Good morning, Jasmine from Warner Robins.
I'm just going to stop that because I'll send you the link to watch the rest. But many had negative comments about that mom and saying, why was she bringing the children to the protest? Why would she put them through that emotional distraught? Well, obviously, these kids had the word for the experience, right? They've already experienced that. It's something that the mom chose to bring them to because she has talked to them about race, what they're going to inherit because of who they look like. And if you notice, these kids, I think the boy might have been 6 and the girl maybe about 5 or 6, but they can articulate what they were experiencing. They can also articulate what happened to George Floyd. You heard them say, I don't understand why some white people don't like us and what they need to do. This is the reality of our brown and Black children. So we don't do them justice by trying to hide things that they're going to experience outside of their care. It is something that our children experience on a regular basis. I remember when I was working at the crisis nursery, there was a child engaging in play, and they had little people, and they had 4 brown people and 1 white doll. And what my teacher noticed actually is that the child was starting to lay down all of the brown dolls, 1 brown doll at a time. And that teacher just observed for a little while and started to ask and be curious of, well, what's going on? Why are the brown dolls laying down and they stood the white doll up? And the child said, because the white doll is a police officer and the black dolls are dead. This child has been exposed to this, right? These negative experiences, the reality of what we inherit of being a black and brown child. So we need to ask the child what is happening. We need to talk to them and prepare them. And again, we cannot guarantee safety outside of our sphere of influence, but we can help them process their emotions, their experiences, and we can talk about and guarantee you can get help here, you can be safe here in this child development center, in this space. And we were very adamant about that at the crisis nursery, not guaranteeing safety in the world of their community, but guarantee while you're here, you can get help. While you're here, there's somebody that can talk to you about your big emotions. And then being able to talk to parents about what we notice, what we observe, and what they can do at home. Thoughts, reflections. That every time I watch that video, I'm just emotionally moved. And I'm also just shocked by the way the children can articulate their experience. So I just wanted to know, is there anybody from the audience that has any thoughts or feedback before we wrap this up? Is there anything?
I'm just monitoring the question box for you, Cami, to see if anything comes through. Yeah, it's hard videos to watch, but it needs to be watched, and to see that, you know, the kids are being impacted and what can we do? So I don't see any questions coming through right now. But again, if anyone has questions later, feel free. I'm sure you can reach out for support. I shouldn't offer that, but we'll follow up with some resources. And hey, maybe that's also a opportunity to invite Cami back for another topic.
And you can feel free to reach out, because you know these conferences are short. I'm giving you a lot, trying to go over. But I do this on a regular basis as I help organizations work with not only kids and families, but each other, and how to have these hard conversations. Also, one more short video and we're in. But I think what we also have to do is identify ways that kids, give them an outlet to express their emotions. Some of us do not feel comfortable with kids expressing anger and rage, and we have to provide a safe space for that. There is a school in North Minneapolis that has actually built a boxing ring. I think it's in Lucy Laney. And what I loved about this school is they use boxing as a way for kids to express themselves, their social, emotional, their frustrations. You know, we can do the yoga, the mindfulness, the calming them down, but I was a kid, I had to get that out. And I'd rather have somebody teach me to get it out in a positive aspect and in a way that's going to help me than taking it out on another person, taking it out on myself. So that school had used boxing as a way for kids to release that energy and that emotions. Those things that I've done in classrooms, pillow punching. Our kids have to release this anger. They got to release these emotions. We should not make them feel shameful for feeling angry or how they're feeling. And like I said, some kids need that physical release. Every kid can't do the yoga and the 5-finger calm down, blow out. They need to get that energy out. So thinking about other ways of how can we provide supportive spaces for kids to release those emotions so they can learn how to regulate those emotions in a positive aspect and not taking it out on others. I think that's very, very important for us to be able to do that. The identifying the feelings and emotions, the validating it. I also would use textures. I'm a very sensory person. And so one of the jobs I worked at, I created a sensory room to teach kids about emotions. We got to give them a name for how they're feeling. I'm a sensory kid, so I believe in tactile. So I will use like more rough carpets or rough textures to talk about emotions like anger and sadness. And so I'm giving them a feeling, an outside experience for that emotion. To talk about calmness and peace, I would use more soft textures. So again, you're labeling their feelings, you're giving them a name for it, and then you're giving them experience. I hear a lot of teachers talk about, oh, we need to calm our bodies. Well, what does calm mean to me? Well, if you give me a soft square, we say, and this is what calm feels like. It feels smooth, and you're describing it. You give them a rough texture. And this is what angry feels like. When we're angry, what can we do when we're mad? So again, giving them a sensory experience to connect them with the emotions and validating their experiences. I have a whole list of ideas that I do. I used to have sensory buckets around my center so that at any moment a teacher has a sensory bucket and activities to de-escalate some behaviors. Because these kids are internalizing this, and we know behaviors have meaning, and so they should not be punished for their experience of being a brown-bodied individual, for their experience of racism. It might show through behaviors, through aggression, taking it out on others, and so we want to make sure that we're prepared for that. Those sensory boxes would pull because they would just be little activities that our teacher could do in a moment. No matter where you were in the building, we would have an activity for kids to be able to express themselves in a healthy manner. Thoughts about that?
Everyone's really liking your concrete examples and that idea about the sensory buckets. They're asking if you can send all your ideas.
Yes. If you have space to create a room, I wholeheartedly, and I can send you pictures of what I did at the crisis nursery. I created a whole room. And we'll end with this 1-minute video. Thank you for going over, guys.
From Massachusetts to California to hear what they're thinking about the death of George Floyd and the protests that erupted.
If I'm being honest.
Understandably, there's heightened fear among Black kids.
I am afraid because I'm afraid of if I go outside, then something will happen to me or my family.
But fear, even if you're not Black.
And I'm a bit afraid that these like riots and stuff, that if they get too big and too out of hand, they could kind of like go into just houses and stuff.
The kids also expressed disappointment.
People should already know that we have to treat people equally and not judge anybody just because they're Black or white.
Psychologists say parents should help kids talk about what they're seeing. But it's hard even for me with my son. From the time he was little to now as a teenager, I've struggled to find the right words to tell my Black child about how to stay safe when he's not with me.
It's important to say, you know, I can imagine how you're feeling. Sometimes I feel that way. And to listen.
The kids that we talk to say images like these give them hope.
I think it's good that the police officers are like showing that not all police are bad.
What have you learned this week?
One thing I did learn is something about in human nature, and that we are capable of coming together, protesting together, and sticking up for each other. No matter your race, let's all live peacefully.
Children standing up for the future they want to see. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, New York.
I thought that was absolutely powerful, and I think we underestimate the capacity for children to understand and navigate these different experiences. So if anything that you take away from today, remember that you are the source to just help disrupt these cycles of racial trauma, of microaggressions. Be aware of your lenses and your cultural experiences and the things that you need to educate yourself about so that you're not contributing to that. Be aware of normalizing conversations about race. Even if your center is not diverse as far as racism, bringing cultural experiences, different identities into the classroom on a regular basis so that you're exposing children to different lived experiences. I always use experiences because our culture goes beyond race. Acknowledging the realism of the trauma and being able to remember your sphere of influence. And I'm over time by 13 minutes, but I thank you guys so much for allowing me continue to do the work that you do. And remember, in order to do this work, you have to fill your cup up. So these are tough times for all of us, and considering what do you need to be able to be your best self for the children and families that you serve. And I can hold on a little bit longer for any questions. Otherwise, I would promise to send all these resources and you guys can contact me. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Cami. I just want to echo, so make sure that you're hearing this. Everyone on the questions dialogue is saying thank you. And how can we hire you to come to our program? So,
I'll give Nikki my information and you guys can send it out. But my email is khoward@wearedivine.org. So if you just Google We're Divine, WEREDIVINE, you can see my whole website. But khoward@wearedivine.com. And I do this every day. I love it. So thank you.
thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much, Cami. Bye.